What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another video. Sorry for the hiatus there. It's been several months since I filmed any progress on our 03 WRX Wagon budget build. But I'm back at it. I have made a lot of progress, so I want to just update you guys real quick on where we're at with this build. So as you can see, the engine is installed. This engine is a JDM EJ205. I didn't have time to film and show me swapping the parts over from the USDM engine block, which is right here, over to this JDM engine block. There's just a few things you have to do. There's this hard pipe right here for the coolant crossover that you have to swap out, as well as these hard lines for coolant as well. And it's all pretty straightforward. There's also the oil drain line. I don't know if you can see it down there beneath the turbo. It's right down in here. That oil drain line from the turbo connects to a hard line underneath that drops into the passenger side cylinder head on the back. And so you just have to swap those out from your USDM engine block into the JDM one. Some of them come with like a single AVCS. This one did not have that because this one did actually come off of a WRX. But the thing that we had to do with this is the timing is different on them. They run slightly different compression, I guess. And so you do have to change over all of the cam gears that go right behind here. So all of my cam gears have been swapped out on this engine, as well as our crank sprocket that's behind the timing cover. You can't see it. It's behind the crank pulley. I did have to swap all those out. Basically what happens if you don't swap those out, you'll go to turn the engine over and the timing will be off and it won't even start. Other things that I have done with this engine is we have mounted up our VF48 turbo. I decided to go with that turbo because I got a really good deal on it. It was only about 400 bucks and it had very low mileage. We also have our Grimspeed downpipe that came on this car. I have hooked up our wideband into that. We have our fuel rails and TGVs installed. And actually my DIY TGV Deletes, I'll actually be pulling those out and swapping them. That wasn't my plan originally, but I found a really good deal on some RCM TGV Deletes, and I just figured, why the hell not? I'm pretty confident that my DIY job would work well and wouldn't leak, but just for some peace of mind, might as well swap them in. Right now I'm actually in the process of rebuilding these fuel lines. These are old fuel lines. I had hooked this fuel system up just to be able to turn the engine over and build some oil pressure and see if it would start up, because you know, this engine came all the way over from Japan and I had no idea what to expect. Over here, I have a brand new steering rack. I know in some previous videos, I did mention that I was gonna rebuild the original steering rack in here, and I did end up doing that. Unfortunately, it did leak immediately, and that could have been my fault. Maybe I didn't rebuild it correctly, although I did do one in the last 03 WRX that I built in this garage. I rebuilt that steering rack and it worked perfectly. The difference this time is I did not use an OEM reseal kit. I used a Gates, and so maybe that is why it failed on me. I'm not really sure. So I just pulled it. I ordered this refurbished one. This is an OE refurbished steering rack, so it'll be nice to have a brand new steering rack installed. Didn't feel like trying to tear that thing all the way apart again. Rebuilding those things kind of sucks. I finally got around to refurbishing my 4-pot calipers, as well as the 2-pot calipers in the back. We got all new pads, rotors, and calipers. These are just some budget coilovers from Raceland. I don't expect them to last too terribly long, but I have heard that for the price, you can't really go wrong with them. So I'm kind of stoked to try them out, and at least I'll be able to lower this thing. So I'll have a much more preferred ride height in the meantime. I also installed this gauge pod with the gauges. It's not fully mounted yet, as you can see. Still have the double-sided tape in there that I have to fasten down. But we have a wideband, a boost gauge, and an oil pressure gauge. Oil pressure gauge actually sits right here. So I bought the little galley plug. You take the one out of the engine block back here. I forget what size Allen head it is, but then you screw in this little adapter fitting, and then the plug for the oil pressure gauge plugs right into that, and I have it routed through along here, and it's drops down and into the firewall underneath the brake booster. So I did end up stripping down my wiring harness. I showed that in a previous video, and this is the new wiring loom that I bought. So I re-loomed this whole thing, and it's not like perfect, but it looks like 1,000 times better than it did. I also put in new coil pack plugs. The old ones that came on the car were really crusty. I also re-loomed this harness too that comes out of the fuse box. So that's looking a lot cleaner as well. There is a piece over here that I re-loomed also that hooks into the firewall over here. Yeah, so all of my wiring looks 1,000 times better. I'm super stoked about that. I have still been able to stay within my budget. If you go back and watch those previous videos, my goal was to keep this whole thing under 10K. That was including the cost of the car. When I purchased this thing, it was running on 3 cylinders. I actually had 0 compression in cylinder number 1 when I did the compression test. It had a really badly burnt valve on that cylinder. So I don't know what they did with this car. There's a lot of things that are pretty suspect about this car. For one, it came with a JDM ECU. Look at our ECUs that we have down here. So this one's pretty funny. It says, for Jose, RS to JDM, GD, WRX. Thanks for your business. And then he signed it. So this had a this was the one that was plugged in when I got the car. I drove it home. Apparently it was tuned with this, or there's a tune on it that they've just been using. This is the USDM ECU. What's funny about this, so I used ROM Writer. I read from the ECU the map that's on it. I sent it to my tuner, and he could tell that it was from a 2005 WRX automatic. So that's pretty silly. I don't know what that's about. So what I ended up doing is purchasing the correct ECU for this car model and year. So yeah, a lot of suspect things with this car, but basically I picked this thing up for $1,500 and tore it apart, tore it down to the chassis. I did reuse some stuff that I got on the car, but I also sold quite a few things as well. I sold the headers that came on it. I sold the parent intake, and I sold the wheels. So some of that money that I recouped, I actually put back into the build. And so not all of this just came right out of pocket. But I've been able to source some really solid parts for this thing, some new, some used, to get this thing up and running and turn it into a nice budget WRX that will also rip and be reliable. Without further ado, I'm just gonna jump to starting these fuel lines, and I'll show you how to install these PTFE fittings, because they are different than the regular -6AN fittings. All right, so for these fuel lines, I have some nylon braided PTFE hose and all of these fittings. I have several 90-degree fittings and one just straight fitting. Unfortunately, I'm gonna need 2 more straight fittings in order to finish this fuel setup, and they should be here in another day. I have this old line out here because these are the right length, so I'm just gonna measure the new PTFE hose against these stainless steel lines to get the right lengths, and then we can just start building the fittings for them. From the fuel filter, which sits right here, we'll have this rubber line that will be clamped there. I used a press fitting on this other end of this, it's like a Continental fuel injection hose. And so I did that because we need to be able to screw into this little Y fitting, which then will allow us to make equal length fuel lines to our fuel rails. The reason I wanted to use a rubber feed line for the fuel is because the PTFE, you can't use clamps on, it won't seal. So clamping the one end to the fuel filter really probably wouldn't work, and I was worried it would end up leaking. So we're using one rubber hose But it's really high quality hose, so it should be just fine. It should last. And if we ever need to replace just this one, it's not really such a big deal. All right, so I'm using these cable cutters, and as you can see, that was the first cut I made. It bent it a little, but not bad. I think it'll be fine. It didn't like crack the sides of the inner lining, and it actually cut it super crisp. So yeah, you definitely want to use some cable cutters if you're going to use this stuff. I would use cable cutters even if you're using regular AN line, because it just cuts it so much cleaner and it's so fast. So these fittings are a little different. They look just like a regular AN fitting, but what they have is this thing called a ferrule right here. It's like this little collar. So how these work, basically you take your AN fitting and you slide it over the hose, push it all the way through. So it's just sitting there like that. You want to separate this, the braided stainless away from the plastic PTFE liner inside. So once you kind of like move a little bit out of the way, you take that little ferrule and you just have to slide it over the top like that and make sure that it gets seated down in there. There's like a little ridge at the very tip of this ferrule, and the plastic liner will sit right up against it. It's probably hard to see on there, but I have it pushed all the way down on there. Then you can take like your screwdriver or whatever and just kind of like push it, make sure that it's all underneath that collar, because you need to be able to fit this end inside there like this without pushing that material back down in there. And you need it to sit flush like that against the collar. Otherwise it will leak. So once you have that in place like that, take this, push it up over, start screwing it in, tighten her down. This is the first time I've actually used this stuff. I just watched some tutorials on how to install it, so that's why I know how to do it. Does seem pretty straightforward. We'll see. If you do this correctly, apparently these are not supposed to ever leak. And this line's supposed to last forever. Voila, one down. I think these look really nice. All right, so all the fuel lines are completed. These are probably the best fuel lines I have ever made, at least in terms of how nice they look. And you know, I would say that even though these are a little bit more tedious and there's more steps involved, you have that extra ferrule piece. I think they're much easier to get them done well. At least that's what it seems like so far. We'll see. If they start leaking, then I might change my mind. But I do have some extra line here. I only ordered 10 feet of this PTFE. I got all of this stuff on Amazon through Evil Energy. So all of these PTFE 6-6AN fittings, as well as this line, was like $100. To be honest, this line seems really high quality, and so do the fittings. So highly recommend checking out Amazon and looking at the Evil Energy stuff. They seem to be a really high quality for the price. It is the next day. Unfortunately, those PTFE hose end fittings did not show up yet. One thing that did show up in the mail that I'm super stoked about is these TGV Deletes right here. This packaging is so baller. These guys definitely go the extra mile. So we got the Deletes right here. underneath. A set of RCM gaskets, and all of this really nice hardware for the Deletes. So pretty stoked about all of that. Let's check these out. Woo! Look at that. Damn, those are nice. Those are shiny. Damn. So one thing that's really cool about these is they come with this rubber seal. What this does is it allows you to run it without the top gasket that goes between the TGV and the manifold. So that's pretty nice. You don't have to have that extra set of gaskets. All right, so I've broken down the old DIY TGV Deletes, got the fuel rails and our injectors off. We have new gaskets or O-rings here for the injectors. And so now we're just gonna install them on these new RCM TGV Deletes. Just gonna use a tiny bit of assembly lube on these O-rings right here for the injectors. This stuff's really nice because it actually will dissolve under heat. Let's do a little bit so we don't break these O-rings. There she is. Looks so nice. You know, it's funny, someone left a comment on one of my previous videos saying like, for God's sakes, get a torque wrench. I have a torque wrench, see? It's right here. This bad boy, this old Craftsman. I also have another torque wrench too. It's this Harbor Freight Special right here. This thing's a piece of crap. It pretty much broke immediately right out of the box. Sometimes it works still when I've tried it, but it's super unreliable, so I don't use it. Sick. Oh man, those look so good. Don't mind the paper towels. Just taking preventative measures. Wow, that's gonna look so nice. All right, so I got everything torqued down to spec. Here's what she looks like with the manifold. Looks pretty freaking sick. You can see those Deletes in there. Nice contrast with the red. Yeah, it looks so nice. I am so stoked about that. Manifold is a little dirty. It got scuffed up a little bit when I first installed the engine, because I made the mistake of installing it with the manifold on. I recommend not doing that if you care about the paint on your manifold. All right guys, so it is the next day again. We should be able to finish up this fuel system today. Just another update here real quick. So I was really concerned about my turbo oil feed line right here. This guy right there. So what I just did is I actually unscrewed it, stuffed a towel under there, unplugged the crankshaft position sensor right there. So I also unplugged the relay. It's right back in there. It's that green plug in the very back. You can see it hanging there. It's this one right here. It plugs into that white connector. I unplugged that because then you can turn the key to the on position and it won't prime the fuel system. So no fuel will be coming out of that guy right there. which I did not want. I stuck a bucket underneath it just to make sure. Turned the key to on. No fuel came out. Obviously, the fuel system has been depressurized since I have all the fuel lines disconnected anyhow. But if I were to turn that key on without that relay unplugged, fuel would start squirting out because it'd prime the pump. So I did that, and then I cranked it over, which it cranks over beautifully. It sounds really healthy, this engine. So cranked it over until my wife could see oil start coming out of this hard line for the oil feed line for the turbo. So I was just like a little bit paranoid. I hadn't tested that yet, and I wanted to make sure that that oil feed line was working properly before we fire this thing up and start driving it around. So thankfully that is working, and so I think our turbo is good to go. All right, so finally I got the rest of the hose end fittings to finish up our plumbing for our fuel system. They are right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish up the last of the fuel lines. I did get one 5/16 inch quick connect fitting for the hard lines right here for the return. And I've never tried one of those, so I don't know if it's gonna work. So I'm gonna pull out of the package right now and check to see if it actually will clip into place there. All right, so I have our fitting here. Let's just see if this will slide into place. It should. All right, so after messing with it for a bit, it does not fit. Don't order a 5/16 inch standard. That was what I read on the forums on Naziok. So on my fuel pressure regulator, I already have the return line hooked up. This is an old like a regular stainless AN line. I'm just gonna have to run it for now, so that way we can get the rest of the fuel system in place and actually test it to make sure that it doesn't leak. But this will work for now, and then later on, once I can figure out what size quick fitting to actually use and that will actually fit on this, we can go ahead and swap it out. So we will hook up the fuel delivery. All right guys, so let me show you what we got here. So if you're working on a Subaru and you're doing your fuel lines like this, I'll just show you real quick tutorial. You have black, blue, and gray. Sometimes I think this is yellow, but I'm not sure. Black, you have fuel delivery. Blue is evap. Gray is fuel return. So I'll just show you how I routed this. You go black, fuel delivery, out to our fuel filter. From the fuel filter, drops down like I showed you before to the Y. From the Y, we have equal length hoses, one going up, routing around, dropping down to the front of this fuel rail. The other one swooping out here, cruising around the front of the TGV to the front of this fuel rail. Fuel return from the back of this fuel rail, it comes back, routes along, drops down between the AC compressor and this TGV, and then it swoops up right there and then into this 90-degree fitting back into the fuel pressure regulator, and then from the back of the driver's side rail swoops up using the shorty line with another straight fitting into the fuel pressure regulator. From the regulator, we have that return line that I had to keep on there, the stainless one. Unfortunately, we'll switch it out later though. And that swoops down, have it going underneath, back to return. My evap system is deleted. That hose is just swooping down underneath the car down there, and it's back underneath the chassis, zip tied in place. So that's pretty much it. That's all there really is to it. If you use this PTFE line, it works really well. Obviously I haven't tested it yet, so I don't know how well it's gonna hold up and whether or not my work is quality enough for them to not leak. But we will find out soon. I think I'm gonna wrap this video up here. It's probably gotten really long-winded at this point. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, please think about subscribing. I am back on the YouTube grind, and so I will start putting out another video every week as much as I possibly can from this point forward. And so yeah, if you want to see more car content and more about this build and watch me get this thing up and running and get it tuned, then stay tuned for more videos in the future. With that said, thanks for joining, and until next time, peace out everybody.